The Israeli government has approved a deal for the release of captives held by Hamas in Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office has released a statement saying 50 women and children will be released over a period of 4 days, during which there will be pauses in fighting. It comes after weeks of negotiations mediated by Qatar. But Netanyahu has vowed to continue the war.
There is idle talk outside, as if after the truce to return our abductees will stop the war. So I'd like to make it clear we are at war and will continue with the war. We'll continue until we achieve all our objectives, eliminate Hamas, return all our abductees and missing persons, and ensure there'll be no element in Gaza that threatens Israel.
Let's get the view from occupied East Jerusalem. Hamda Salhut joins us live from there. So, Hamda, despite some opposition, the vote finally went through. What more do we know about the deal?
Right, Marlene, after around 6 hours of discussions and debate in the Israeli parliament, the vote finally went through to accept this deal that will see the release of 50 captives who are women and children in exchange for a 4-day pause in the fighting. However, the Israeli government statement did not stipulate any of the conditions that they have agreed to for the Palestinians, but it rather went on to say that they are hoping to release all of their captives and that this is a step in the right direction. However, in the statement Hamas released shortly after the Israeli government's decision, they released a lot of the details that were reportedly part of the negotiations, which include the release of 50 captives who are women and children, the release of 150 Palestinian prisoners who are women and children, a complete pause in the fighting. This means that Israel will not allow any military vehicles into Gaza. There will be no drones flying over the southern part of the Gaza Strip for the entirety of the 4 days. And for the northern part of the Gaza Strip, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for those 6 hours, there will be no air traffic there. Additionally, Hamas has said that Israel agreed to not attack or arrest any Palestinian fighters inside of the Gaza Strip for these 4 days, asking, additionally, they said, for hundreds of trucks of humanitarian aid and fuel, and additionally freedom of movement for Palestinians on Salhut Road, where we have seen hundreds of thousands of Palestinians go from the north to the south, evacuating that heavy Israeli bombardment. Now, all of this is stipulated in those agreements, but the Israelis have not yet released what they have agreed to. This is all coming from the statement from Hamas, but after 6 hours of discussion, the Israeli government was clear about one thing, that this is simply a temporary pause in the fighting, and it is in no way an indication to the end of the war, but rather that the Israeli army will regroup in these 4 days and continue their ground operation, continue their air raids, and continue with full force until they have achieved all of their objectives, which include the return of all of the captives and the complete dismantlement of Hamas, both militarily and politically.
OK, thank you for that. Hamda Salhut there for us in occupied East Jerusalem. Let's get the view from the United States. We can speak to Mike Hanna in Washington, D.C. Mike, so the Israeli cabinet finally approving this deal. Presumably, this takes some pressure off the Biden administration. The U.S. has a lot riding on this deal, doesn't it?
Yes, indeed. The U.S. administration invested a lot in this deal. It played an active role in a number of the negotiations. President Biden himself went to Israel in person. You also had a situation where American diplomats were traveling widely through the region, an important point of contact in terms of getting all the parties together, using leverage in some quarters. And certainly this is something that is going to be deeply welcomed by the Biden administration.
Now, I believe you were briefed by a senior U.S. official. What did he have to tell you?
Well, it's astonishing, actually, the depth of the diplomacy that was involved in this whole process. It's a process that took weeks. And one must remember, too, is that you're dealing here with governments but you are also dealing with a non-state actor in the form of Hamas. Now, these negotiations were ongoing, very difficult, obviously, since many of them are not face-to-face. They through contacts, Qatar playing an absolutely critical role in all of this. At one stage, says the official, Hamas went completely dark. The whole process ground to a halt. And at that stage, President Biden personally called the Emir of Qatar, and that was beginning to unravel. And at that stage, the deal began to come back together again. And what is very interesting in terms of the briefing from that senior official is the degree to which President Biden was personally involved and hands-on. The administration officials saying that Biden was being briefed from hour to hour about what was happening. He phoned or spoke to Benjamin Netanyahu on at least 14 occasions. He spoke to President Sisi. He spoke to the Emir of Qatar. And this all helped bring the situation together and also restarted the process once it appeared to come to a halt. Now, the official also made clear that from the announcement of the deal to the implementation could take as much as 24 hours, saying that it looks as though the hostages will begin to be released Thursday morning local time, and that at that particular stage, we're looking at maybe a multi-day period in which the hostages are brought back, those who are captured are brought back, and the Palestinian prisoners are being released. Now, the official also said that there are still some T's to cross and some I's to dot, and that is going to be done back in Qatar before the full details of this deal emerge. But certainly it's been a painstaking process involving a number of countries, a number of governments, and that one non-state actor, Hamas. But most importantly, it appears the massive role that President Biden personally played in reaching this agreement.
Mike, very interesting to talk to you. Mike Hanna, our correspondent there in Washington, D.C. Well, we can speak now to James Dorsey. He's an Honorary Fellow, National University of Singapore's Middle East Institute. He joins me now live from Jakarta. So, still more details of this deal emerging every minute. What's your reaction to what we've heard so far?
Well, I think obviously it's important to get whatever hostages one can out and as much aid into Gaza. But what this tells you is how difficult things are going to be going forward. With other words, once you get to the question of releasing Israeli military personnel held captive by Hamas, these negotiations are going to become much more difficult. My sense is that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu was caught in a bind. On the one hand, domestic pressure, which wants the hostages released and wants them released now. And on the other hand, U.S. pressure to allow for a truce. And the Israeli fear, of course, there is that Hamas would use that to its military advantage in terms of regrouping, restocking, whatever it may be. But I think more importantly, Israel wants to come out of this war as being seen as having restored its deterrence capability. What it's so far shown is its destructive capabilities. It has not yet really succeeded in wiping out the senior leadership of Hamas or paralyzing them. And as long as it isn't able to do so, the question of its ability to deter, and that's important not just vis-a-vis the Palestinians and vis-a-vis Gaza, but it's also incredibly important vis-a-vis Iran and in terms of its posture with the Gulf states.
OK, and in terms of this deal, we heard there from our correspondent talking about, how hands-on President Biden was in terms of these negotiations. And interestingly, before Netanyahu went in to discuss the deal with his cabinet, he thanked President Biden for making the deal sweeter for the Israelis. How significant do you think that is?
I think it is significant. And one of the things that I think is also significant in this, it took significant Israeli or U.S. pressure to get this deal done, which really tells you what it's going to take in terms of U.S. pressure to get something more permanent in place, if not a transition towards Palestinian self-rule of some kind, independence or control of Gaza at least.
I mean, on the plus side, a welcome release for the people involved in the fighting, the humanitarian situation. We are hoping that aid will go through. But Prime Minister Netanyahu making very, very clear that the fighting is going to resume.
Obviously, anything is welcome that relieves pressure on Palestinians, even if it is only briefly, and brings the guns, at least in some areas, to fall silent. But I think overall, Israel is in no mood to end this conflict or end this war at this point. It hasn't achieved its objectives yet. And it also, and not only for the reasons of deterrence, but at this point, it also needs victory because it's lost the information war. And so Israel has every interest in continuing this conflict, and I think that's what Netanyahu made clear.
Really good to get your perspective. James Dorsey, Honorary Fellow, National University of Singapore's Middle East Institute, speaking to us there from Jakarta.
Thank you for having me.